Hello and welcome back. This is the lecture slideshow for week 5. These slides cover the 5th week of the course. For this set of slides, read handout 2 in module 3, sections 1 through 12. Explore the links to additional content within Canvas module 3, especially the articles by Marian David and Michael Jubian. They are complex and deep. Focus on the arguments I discuss, the rest is background. Here is our topic question. Isn't truth relative to one's perspective? What is truth? Said jesting Pilate, and would not stay for an answer. But it is not only the difficulty and labor which men take finding out of truth, nor again that when it is found it imposeth upon men's thoughts, that doth bring lies in favor, but a natural though corrupt love of the lie itself. Francis Bacon. Here are some basic leading questions we need to look at answers to for this course. I'm going to run through these questions and some preliminary answers, and I give more details on handout 2. We're going to focus on truth in this lecture. What is truth? The traditional answer is that truth is a property of propositions, where propositions are expressed by sentences. In sentences, we assert claims. Well, what are propositions? Propositions will be what we call the bearers of truth value. If I assert that snow is white, the sentence snow is white expresses the proposition snow is white, which is supposed to be telling us something about the real world. The subject is snow. Of snow, we say it's white. That's its predicate. The claim is true if the proposition it expresses describes the world accurately, corresponds to reality. Who decides which claims are true? The answer we're going to converge on is that reality does. People don't have anything to do with this. Who cares what's really true? I think it really matters whether the air we breathe is toxic to us. I think it really matters whether the cancer diagnosis the physician just gave us is something we should be concerned about. What are beliefs? Okay, beliefs are going to be attitudes towards propositions. For instance, a belief in a proposition is the attitude that you think the proposition is true. There are other attitudes towards propositions. Doubt is an example. I doubt that Sasquatch in the Sierra exist. I could be wrong. I don't know whether or not it's true. Who decides which claims you should believe? I think ultimately that's you. You examine the evidence for claims, you look at the alleged facts, you decide using logic, observation. How do we decide what to believe? We decide what to believe by examining the evidence. What is an argument? We'll talk about this, but an argument is a collection of propositions intended to establish the truth of one particular claim, namely the conclusion. We'll look at some of these as we go through the course. We've already looked at an argument by, for instance, by Professor Pamela Ronald. In her presentation, The Case for Engineering Our Food, Ronald makes the case that GMOs are more beneficial overall than harmful, and that we should use them. In fact, this is a good place for you to see a reconstructed version of her argument in what we call standard form, where we list her reasons for her conclusion so as to show how her definitions, assumptions, and data support her main claim. She begins with a definition. A genetically modified organism, GMO, is any organism whose genetic material has been altered using genetic engineering techniques. She shows how most of our food has been genetically modified. For example, soy, corn, canola, cotton, milk, sugar, squash, papaya, rice, bananas, strawberries, tomatoes, beans, livestock, etc. And that after 20 plus years of careful study and rigorous review by thousands of independent scientists, every major scientific organization in the world concludes that GMO crops currently on the market are safe to eat, and that the process of genetic engineering is no more risky than older methods of genetic modification. Sometimes GMOs are the cheapest, safest, and most effective technology for enhancing food security and advancing sustainable agriculture. For example, flood-tolerant rice reduces the typical 40% harvest loss that non-modified conventional rice varieties suffer. Genetically modified golden rice contains beta-carotene, a precursor of vitamin A. It feeds hundreds of thousands of malnourished, vitamin A deficient people. Genetic engineering then benefits people by nourishing the growing population, increasing harvest yields, fighting pests and disease, and reducing the amount of insecticides in crop production. It's our responsibility to do everything we can to help humans thrive and safeguard the environment. This is her general moral principle, her presumption about what we should or should not do. When GMOs are safe, increase harvest yields, reduce pesticide use, make food more available and affordable, and feed more people than conventional crops, then GMOs are beneficial and we should use them. So, her conclusion: GMOs are beneficial and we should use them. Okay, let's return to the concept of belief we're going to use in our analysis of truth. Here is a paradox about belief raised by the philosopher of logic and mathematics Willard Van Orman Quine. To believe something is to believe that it is true. Therefore, a reasonable person believes each of his beliefs to be true. Yet, experience has taught him to expect that some of his beliefs, he knows not which, will turn out to be false. A reasonable person believes, in short, that each of his beliefs is true and that some of them are false. What are the implications of this? A reasonable person believes, in short, that each of his beliefs is true and that some of them are false. It means that there are going to be many beliefs we have that are just plain false. This means we can't know what we believe is true just because we believe it or want it to be true. We can't trust the confidence or certainty with which anyone holds a belief as evidence that it is true. Can you think of any such beliefs you have had? People believed that Earth is flat, so ancient and medieval maps showed that Earth is flat. Can you see the Mediterranean in there? Let's flip it. Flipping this map from the 1100s makes it more familiar to us. Can you see the Mediterranean Sea? For centuries, people believed that Earth is flat. Such maps illustrate this. Roger Bacon again in 1620 says, "Man prefers to believe what he prefers to be true. Therefore, he rejects difficult things from impatience of research, sober things because they narrow hope, the deeper things of nature from superstition, the light of experience from arrogance and pride, lest his mind should seem to be occupied with things mean and transitory, things not commonly believed, out of deference to the opinion of the vulgar." Numberless and short are the ways, and sometimes imperceptible, in which the affections color and infect the understanding. It's real important here to distinguish between belief and truth. These are often confused. Belief is not identical with truth. What's the difference? Beliefs are attitudes about propositions. So what are propositions? Claims, when clear, express propositions. Propositions are the meanings of coherent claims. Bits of language, sentences, and speech utterances convey claims and sometimes express propositions when they describe the world. Nonsensical claims don't express propositions. For instance, here is a nonsensical claim, a claim which doesn't make any sense, doesn't express a proposition. Colorless, green ideas sleep furiously. What does that mean? Does that make any sense? Colorless, green. Right away, contradiction. Colorless, green ideas. How are ideas colored or not colored? Colorless, green ideas sleep furiously. Doesn't make sense, does it, to say that ideas sleep? People sleep. People sleep and have ideas, but this can be made clearer. And so we say the sentence is unclear. Even though someone's trying to say something, there's no real clear meaning, no clear intention. Thus we say it doesn't express a proposition. Colorless, green ideas sleep furiously. Makes no sense. It's grammatically correct. Kind of seems like it makes sense, but we have to add things to it in order to make it make sense, in which case it then becomes a clear proposition where we've removed some contradictions and clarified some vagueness. In short, it's not true all claims express propositions. Claims that do express propositions are said to be true when those propositions are accurate, that is, they correspond to reality. Propositions themselves are either true or false. A person or a subject either believes a specific proposition or they don't. But whether they believe it has no effect on whether it is true. Propositions about the world don't need people to believe them to be true. Let's contrast belief and truth. Beliefs, again, are attitudes towards propositions. Beliefs can be true or false. To say that S believes P means that S believes that P is true. Beliefs are opinions. They may or may not be true of the world or whatever we are referring to. Where S is a specific subject, say a person, P is a specific claim. Say, Earth is flat. Beliefs are always either true or false. Truths are just plain true or facts. Whether a specific proposition is believed depends on people. Whether it is true or false doesn't. A person can believe a proposition is true even if it is actually false. A person cannot believe a proposition even if it's true. But a truth is true and a falsehood is false even if someone does not believe it. 7 plus 5 equals 12 always, whenever, whomever says it or doubts it. Continuing, truth is a property of propositions. Facts are true propositions. Facts are truths. There are no false facts. Falsehoods are the opposite of facts. There are false beliefs or opinions. In the claim S believes P, the P is the proposition that S believes is true. So this is the mainstream view. Truths are facts corresponding to the real world. This is the correspondence theory of truth, upon which many of us rely, including scientists. See the article by Marion David in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy for an introduction to this. On this view, since beliefs can be true or false and facts can't be false, truths and beliefs are different. Summarizing, a fact is a truth. A belief is an opinion. Therefore, a belief is not truth. Read the first two sections of this article by Marion David in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It gets deep quickly. I want you to look at this to familiarize yourself with the concept we're going to use. Here's Alfred Tarski in the 1940s, a philosopher of logic. Snow is white is true if and only if snow is white. And here you see the claim snow is white, after removing the quotation marks, the quote marks, expresses the proposition snow is white. And so snow is white is true, the claim is true, just in case the thing about snow is that snow's actually white. Can't get much clearer than that. Let's return to our topic question. Isn't truth relative to one's perspective? I will use the proposition that Earth is flat in what follows. It's clear that it asserts something allegedly true about Earth. But is it? Is it true in any sense beyond people's perspective? The International Flat Earth Society says, why do we say the Earth is flat when the vast majority says otherwise? Because we know the truth. In this image, Earth is a flat disk. You can see the sun and the moon. Do some people really still believe Earth is flat? Okay, aren't all claims true in some sense? Isn't anything possible? You hear people say. I don't think so, no. For example, all contradictions are necessarily false. That is, opposing assertions cannot be true at the same time. For instance, to say that Trump is the 45th U.S. president and Trump is not the 45th U.S. president makes no sense. So we reject it as false. We don't get to have the concept of a contradiction if contradictions can be true. By definition, contradictions are false. The one thing we can say is that a contradiction is false. Avoid something called doublethink. This was described by Orwell in the book 1984. This is the idea that you can actually hold two contradictory beliefs in your mind simultaneously, accepting both of them. I completely believe people are able to do this, that is, believe contradictory things. But the issue is not whether people can believe it, whatever that means. The issue is whether the contradictory claims can be true. To say the Earth is flat and the Earth is not as flat at the same time can't be true. These are examples of doublethink from Orwell's book. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. What we're dealing with here is something called, by philosophers, the principle or the law of non-contradiction. It's also called the law of contradiction. In logical form, it's this. It's not the case that you can assert P and not P at the same time. Here's the Persian philosopher Abu Sina. Anyone who denies the law of non-contradiction should be beaten and burned until he admits that to be beaten is not the same as not to be beaten, and to be burned is not the same as not to be burned. Now, he's not advocating this sort of brutality, but what he's saying is, really, think about it. You can't believe being beaten is the same thing as not being beaten, or being burned is the same thing as not being burned. So what is truth? Is truth relative to a perspective? Notice I'm saying truth, not belief. Beliefs depend on perspectives, but do truths. Suppose truth is relative. What could this mean exactly? 5 possibilities. All truths are relative to some perspective or other. Without perspectives, there aren't any truths. Or is it what is true for one person may not be true for another? Or is it the claim truth is relative is also relatively true? That sounds like a problem. Or finally, some truths are relative. But come on, isn't truth relative to a perspective? I think either A or E is what people are trying to say. Either that all truths are relative or that some of them are. Now look, if all truths are relative, then some of them are. But if some of them are, it doesn't mean that all of them are. And so we have to get clear on what exactly relativism is saying. Is it saying that all truths are relative? That's a big deal. That means there's nothing that's true unless some perspective, thinks it. Or are they trying to say something, I think, which is going to be trivial, namely that some truths are relative, which leaves room for some truths being, true, independent of perspective. Notice that even if the claim all truths are relative is true, so is the claim some truths are relative. But if some truths are relative, then the claim all truths are relative could be false. All implies some, but some does not imply all. I'm going to make the case that relativists seem to be asserting that all truths are relative, not that some truths are. Because ultimately, some truths are relative is trivial. Yes, that's true. But it would undermine the claim that all truths are relative if only some truths are. Lots of people think that what is true really depends upon what people believe. Is there any truth in this? Let's call relativism the view that no proposition is absolutely true. There aren't any that are absolutely true independently of a perspective. Here's the argument. Any proposition can only be relatively true. Every proposition is true with respect to some perspective and false relative to others. Thus, truth is a relation between a proposition and a person, culture, or society. So there are no absolute truths. Example, Earth is flat is false for me, but was true for people living in the Middle Ages. Sounds plausible. Look again at this argument. It presumes what it needs to prove. In Claim 1 and Claim 2, especially 2, every proposition is true with respect to some perspective and false relative to others? That's dubious, if not outright false. So here's the rival view. It's the opposite of relativism. Let's call it absolutism. This is a traditional term. Some propositions are absolutely true. What's that mean? Here's the argument. Being true is just a property that a proposition either has or doesn't have. No proposition needs to be believed by anyone. The true propositions are those that accurately represent the world. So some truths are absolutely true. When we say Earth is flat is true, we are saying Earth is flat is true if and only if, in fact, Earth is flat. Again, the two rival views juxtaposed. I want you to notice that these views are not compatible. When one's true, the other's false. They can't both be true at the same time. Here is an argument for relativism. It's called the argument from diversity. There are many forms of this. The idea is that there is a diversity of opinions out there. People disagree about a lot of things, and that this is somehow evidence. There's no fact of the matter with respect to whether any particular claim is true. In fact, it's only relatively true. Here it is. In society X, Earth is flat. In society Y, Earth is not flat. Therefore, the proposition that Earth is flat is only relatively true. It is true relative to some cultures, false relative to others. Let's make society X medieval Europe. So in the Middle Ages, most regular people believed Earth is flat. Fast forward to today, in modern times, most people believe Earth is not flat. So we're society Y. Society X and Y disagree. That means there's no right answer. Well, that's the argument, at least. The problem with this argument is that it claims that claims 1 and 2, which are about two societies and their differing beliefs, somehow is evidence that their differing beliefs prove there's no fact of the matter. Notice that the conclusion is about the nature of truth. That is, truth is relative. And it gets this conclusion from a couple of claims about how people have different beliefs. Do you see the confusion here, moving from what people believe to what's true? Claims 1 and 2, if true, only show that two societies disagree about whether Earth is flat. It's true that they have different beliefs. Their beliefs about Earth are different. That is, this is only about what these two societies believe. It's not really about whether truth is always relative. In fact, unless truth is not relative, claims 1 and 2 cannot be true. The argument depends on claims 1 and 2 being true, that is, people disagree, have different views about whether Earth is flat or not. So for this argument to go through, it would need claims 1 and 2 to be true and not in a relative sense at all. But that's not the problem. The problem is there's a change of subject from, hey, it's true, different societies have different beliefs about whether Earth is flat, to the claim that this somehow means Earth is flat is only relatively true. For real. Truly. Again, there's that problem. Arguments like this from cultural or societal or perspectival diversity rest on the mistake of confusing the actual context sensitivity of a sentence with the imagined relativity of truth of a proposition. Whether or not a sentence is true, whether or not it expresses a clear proposition, depends on what you're talking about, depends on context. And it's true that in the context of describing Earth in one society, the description disagrees with is different than the description in another society. But that's a different claim than the claim about whether truth always is in fact relative to perspectives. The people in the societies which disagree don't think truth is relative to perspective. In fact, they believe what they do because what they believe is that Earth is flat or it is not, for real, truly. It's time to look at an argument against relativism. The general philosophical objection to relativism is that it's self-refuting. It contradicts itself. And that's a big problem. So let's call this the relativism is self-refuting argument against relativism. Here, I'm following Professor Michael Jubian. I've given you a link to a short article he's written about this topic here, namely relativism. From his text, you should be able to find this in Canvas within the module. The argument is comprised of 7 claims, with the main claim, the conclusion, is claim 7. Let's begin with that. The argument is going to conclude that relativism is contradictory, since there's an internal contradiction among the assumptions of the argument itself. So this is difficult. Let's go through this slowly. Again, I'm just extracting this straight from the article I gave you to read in Canvas. Claim 1. Let S be any specific proposition. Now suppose that 2. No proposition is absolutely true or absolutely false. Any proposition is true from some perspectives, false from others. This is just the statement of relativism with which we began. Call it rel. What we're doing here is we're presuming, for the sake of argument, the claim under question and wondering if it makes sense with everything else we believe. Claim 3. Therefore, S, that specific proposition, is neither absolutely true nor absolutely false. It's true from some perspectives and false from others. Thus we may, number 4, let P be any specific perspective from which S is true. Then, number 5, the proposition that S is true from perspective P is true. But then, number 6, at least one proposition is just plain true. That is, some propositions are not relatively true. And here I refer to the claim in line 5 of the argument, the claim about the proposition in blue, S is true from perspective P. See, that's supposed to be true. Is it true in a relativist sense or in a non-relativist sense? It looks like it's true in a non-relativist sense, so you can't presume absolutism or non-relativism in an argument for relativism. And so we have the conclusion, number 7, therefore, rel is contradictory, since line 6 contradicts line 2. Again, line 2 is just a presumption of relativism, presume relativism is true, and line 6 is a contradictory claim, namely that at least one claim is just plain true, when relativism is the idea that no proposition is absolutely true. But there is a more devastating argument against relativism. We're going to call this the no theory argument against relativism. Again, look at the Michael Jubian article for more details on this, but what I give you here is a standard form version of that argument. The conclusion here, let's begin there. The conclusion here is that either relativists contradict themselves when they assert that relativism is just plain true, or by asserting that relativism is true relative to P1 is just plain true, or else they never actually produce any meaningful assertion at all, and so they have no theory. Let's look at the details starting with Claim 1. Any theory includes a set of assertions, no theory. This is a sort of standard view about what a theory is, where theories describe or explain something. Number 2, if S is any specific proposition, then to assert S is to claim that S is true. In particular, to assert relativism is to claim that relativism is true. But, number 3, relativists cannot claim that relativism is just plain true without contradicting themselves, for they deny that anything is just plain true. Recall the previous argument. Thus, number 4, relativists can only be consistent if they are asserting implicitly that relativism is true relative to some perspective, say P1. But, number 5, then they are asserting that relativism is true relative to P1, perspective 1. That is, they are claiming that the proposition that relativism is true relative to perspective 1 is itself true. But, 6, once again, they can't consistently mean just plain true. Remember, they're the ones who believe every claim is relatively true. There's no absolutely true claim whatsoever. It turns out they're going to need absolute truth for any argument in support of their position to go through. The thing is, they can't have the assumption that all claims are relatively true, or that no claims are absolutely true, and at the same time assert that no claims are absolutely true is true. So on to number 7. Relativists must be asserting implicitly that the proposition that relativism is true relative to P1 is true relative to some perspective, some other perspective, say perspective 2. But then number 8, they are asserting that the proposition that relativism is true relative to P1 is true relative to P2 is true. But number 9, they still can't mean just plain true. This just keeps happening over and over. They owe us yet another relativization. Number 10, therefore, either relativists contradict themselves when they assert relativism is just plain true, or by saying that relativism is true relative to a perspective is just plain true, or else they actually don't ever say anything meaningful, or else they never actually produce any meaningful assertion at all, and so they have no theory about what truth is. Let me give you an example, an analogy, a comparison to think about. Suppose this massive traffic accident occurs in downtown Sacramento. Lots of people involved, lots of property damage. Nobody is seriously injured. The police go around and ask people to describe what happened. So you talk to several people and you get completely different stories about what happened first, what happened next, who's at fault, whether the light was red or green. And so suppose someone says, since everybody disagrees, or we can't find a consistent story between all of the people reporting what happened, there is no fact of the matter. That is, no one is at fault. Nothing explains the accident. There is no fact of the matter as to the cause of the accident or the factors involved in the accident's happening. It's almost like saying the accident didn't even happen because people can't agree on what made it happen. Do you see how that's similar to the arguments that we've looked at for relativism? Okay, both of the previous two arguments are difficult. The last one, the no theory argument, is especially difficult to follow. You should go through it yourself slowly and see if you can understand what the point is. The ultimate point is that relativism contradicts itself. And if it doesn't contradict itself, then it really isn't saying anything at all. It's not telling us anything new. It's not telling us anything about the nature of truth. At best, it's telling us that people have different beliefs. People disagree about what's true. And that's not a view at all about what the nature of truth is, about what it means for a claim or a proposition to be true. Let's move on. In the history of ideas, there have been many theories about the nature of truth. We're going to presume the correspondence theory, which is about 2,000 or so years old. But there have been other theories. Other theories persist. These theories sound kind of relativistic, but they're not quite that exactly. I'll just mention these here for some historical perspective, and then I'll tell you why I think we converge on the correspondence theory, even if there are other theories of truth out there at work. I think in the end that they're doing different things than the correspondence theory. So to be really clear, the correspondence theory we think begins with Aristotle. And here's what he says. I can't say it any clearer than this. To say either that which is not, or that which is not is a falsehood. And to say that which is, and that which is not, is true. There's another set of theories, we'll call them coherence theories, and they assert something like the following, that two or more beliefs are said to cohere, hang together, be consistent with each other, if they fit together or agree with one another. So any belief is true to the degree that it is consistent with other beliefs. For instance, in the world of Star Wars, Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. What makes the claim Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father true is that in that world, well, that's the story. So we say what makes it true is that it's a fictional world, but what makes it true is that Darth Vader is actually his father. In Return of the Jedi, a dying Yoda confirms to Luke that Darth Vader, previously Anakin Skywalker, is actually his father. Despite Luke's belief that Darth Vader's claim to fatherhood in The Empire Strikes Back was a lie to pull Luke to the dark side. So in that story, it makes sense, even though Luke didn't believe it when he heard it at first. There are pragmatic theories of truth. Here are a couple. The consensus view. This is the idea that a true proposition is one which would be endorsed unanimously by all persons who have had sufficient relevant experiences to judge it. Money does not buy happiness. We all agree it's true that money doesn't buy happiness because we have examples of people with money who are not happy. So the way I think people interpret this, instrumentalism. A proposition counts as true if and only if behavior based on a belief in the proposition leads, in the long run, and all things considered, to beneficial results for the believer. Positive thinking heals us. It's okay to believe that, to believe it's true, because if you feel better after positive thinking, then that was what caused you to feel better. That's instrumental in causing you to feel better. It's useful, even though it's not always true. Here's another example of instrumentalism. It gratifies people. It pleases them to believe that God punishes the wicked and rewards, even if it isn't true that God punishes bad people or that all people who behave and are good go to heaven. It benefits us to believe that it's true. In fact, it preserves the social fabric. People don't mistreat each other because they're afraid of going to hell. People are good to each other, nice to each other. They give to charity because they want to go to heaven. Maybe you noticed that I struggled to describe coherence theory and pragmatic theory with respect to truth because I wanted to say something true in the correspondence sense, something that corresponded with reality, the reality of how people interpret the notion of truth, in a way that was somehow independent of it. My issue is that coherence theory and pragmatic theory presume the correspondence theory of truth. Let me be clear on this. There are two big problems with non-correspondence views. There are these subtle changes of subject when contrasting these ideas about truth. We're moving away from saying what makes a proposition true to why people believe a proposition is true, which is a different subject. On the coherence theory, people believe a proposition because it hangs together with everything else they believe. See, that's what causes them to accept it. It's consistent with other things they believe. But now we're not talking about what makes a proposition true. We're talking about what makes people believe it. Same goes for pragmatic theory. We want to know what makes a proposition true, and instead, We get a view about how it makes people happy to believe certain things, how it's useful for people to believe certain things. So they believe it because it's useful to them. It's practical. It has some value for them to believe. Again, we're getting a reason why people believe, but we're not any longer talking about what makes a claim true. The fact that it's useful doesn't make it true. The fact that it's useful makes people believe it. So there's this shift from propositions being about the world to propositions being about human beliefs. Both coherence and pragmatic theories need to presume the correspondence theory in their own descriptions of truth. You can't articulate those theories without saying something correspondence theory true about the nature of truth. In other words, these theories piggyback on top of the correspondence theory of truth. They don't themselves offer an independent account of what truth is. Summarizing, whether propositions are true is context dependent, but this isn't evidence that the truth itself is relative. Only one of these views can be true, so which do you prefer that we presume when we describe an explained phenomena? Relativism says no proposition is absolutely true. Absolutism says some propositions are absolutely true. One of these claims, I think, is true. The claim some propositions are absolutely true describes the attitude about truth that scientists have. Lots of us have. This leaves room for some propositions not being absolutely true, namely, their truth is going to depend upon what perhaps a person believes. Let me give you an example of that. Today, my favorite flavor of ice cream is Gold Medal Ribbon. It's true about Merlino that today, his favorite flavor of ice cream is Gold Medal Ribbon. It corresponds to the reality of what I prefer in my head right now. So it's not relatively true, it's context-dependent true because it's about me and my personal preference today for which ice cream I choose when I walk into the Baskin-Robbins. Notice, it's absolutely true if and only if that I prefer the Gold Medal Ribbon ice cream today, if that's exactly what I want in my head right now. Relativism is an extreme position. It's the idea that no proposition is absolutely true. And I raise the issue of, well, what about that one? The one about whether any proposition is absolutely true. You can't say no proposition is absolutely true, and yet the description of your theory says something absolutely true, namely that no proposition is absolutely true. This is called being hoisted on your own petard. So here is my summary of criticisms of relativism. Number one, relativism is incoherent. Doesn't make any sense because it fails to state any theory of truth that is unambiguous or useful. Also, the least ambiguous version of relativism presumes correspondence truth or changes the subject. Number two, relativism is false because it's self-contradictory. It asserts as true the view that no propositions are absolutely true. Again, relativism is true only if it isn't. It contradicts itself. Number three, relativism is trivial because it's true that people have diverse and disagreeing beliefs. But this is not a view about truth. This is a view about people, how they disagree. And disagreement is not evidence of there being no fact of the matter. In fact, the people who disagree are disagreeing about what the facts are. They agree that there are facts. They disagree about those facts. What a sentence asserts, what proposition it expresses, depends on context, which determines whether it is true, not perspectives. The main point. What one believes will depend upon one's perspective. Beliefs are relative to perspectives. But whether what one believes is true doesn't. I don't think most people are relativists. Here is what I do when I hear people say things like true for me. I translate what people say. True for me means the same thing as I believe it's true, which is fine. This is a person telling you what they believe truly, what they believe they actually believe. Someone says, Jesus saves. The only way to get to heaven is to accept Jesus as your personal Savior. They say, that's true for me. I think they're saying they believe it's true. I think they're being sincere. I think maybe they're being honest. True for me is not the same thing as all truths are relative. That's a whole different claim. True for me is about me. All truths are relative is something about the nature of truths or truth. True for me is a claim about me, not about truth. In fact, whether it is true about me depends on absolutism about truth, since any claim cannot be true about something unless it is really true. Truth is truth. It's madness to believe otherwise. In Cambodia, barbecued field rat is a delicious snack. Okay, people are entitled to believe whatever they wish to believe. People may prefer whatever food they eat. But this is a claim about Cambodian food preferences, which depends, in fact, on what is true in the absolutist sense about Cambodians. It shows that tastes depend on people. It does not show that truth is relative. That's all I have to say about the concept of truth. Next, Module 3 on scientific reasoning. For this, read Chapter 2 in the Akasha text and the rest of Handout 2, Truth and Knowledge. Watch the video, The Vaccine War. There is a link to it in Canvas Module 3. Be prepared to answer the following question about this video. Lots of people conclude that vaccines are unsafe for their children. What are their most compelling arguments for this belief? You should be able to state at least one of these arguments fairly and concisely. This is the end of the slideshow.